Hey, everybody. This is Kevin Coll, host of the Pitch Podcast. Welcome back. This is episode 2. And as always, we're going to explore the latest trends in filmmaking, but more importantly, our ideas for movie franchises. I have a few guests this week. You know him as Vactor from the Vactorverse. And then a very, very special guest, longtime friend, Mr. Rob Keys from Screen Rant. Thanks for joining, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're going to take a dive into the world of science fiction and the pantheon of science fiction, the godfather of science fiction, Star Wars. And I probably have been excited about this podcast since the day I started the pitch. And we started with Superman just because of the timeliness. But I feel like Star Wars is very timely right now. We have The Mandalorian coming March 1st. Yes. We're coming off the heels of Andor. A lot of news around the Acolyte series that's in production right now. And there's Daisy Ridley's been in the news lately with talking about her time as Rey and just, kind of taking both sides of the who is Rey and her family lineage argument, stuff like that. So I feel like there's never been a better time to talk about Star Wars. So we're going to kickstart it in today. And it's probably going to be a multiple pod. Because there's so many different complexities with Star Wars in a conversation that we could dive into, but we're going to dive into the Skywalker saga. We're going to dive into the Star Wars universe. So grab your lightsabers. Let's get ready. Let's go. So I'm going to just start. Rob, I'll start with you.
Sure.
What does Star Wars mean to you, my friend?
What a broad question. I can go on for hours. Good thing it's a multi-pod. Yeah. No, it's one of those, for me, it is a sort of a life-defining personal interest, right? And there are a couple pillars like this which got me from the things I loved as a kid and that stole my imagination and helped define the things I played with, the things I collected and still collect now. You can't see it, but there's boxes out of frame of my Action Fleet toys from the 90s and early aughts. And I have lightsabers all over the table here. You guys get crazy. I'll turn one on. And that passion kind of led me into like always reading about it. So that went beyond rewatching movies that I saw as a youth and talked with kids at school about to like, I think with our age group in particular, I remember like in the early 90s, like going to class and on the easel, like the teachers would draw the Death Star and X-Wings. And it's like, it was just everywhere. Even though it was kind of years post Return of the Jedi. But certainly 90s and aughts, I grew up with the Star Wars games. I played probably every single one of them. I lived out in the country and didn't have high-speed internet. So when I played online, I played a game called X-Wing Alliance competitively online. I wish YouTube and influencer culture was alive back then before I went to university because I feel like I would have made it big as a competitive X-Wing Alliance player. I am like the world's best 1-versus-1 TIE Interceptor pilot in that game. No
nice.
Joke. Yeah, bringing it way back.
I think you need to bring that back and just do a full Twitch on that, like
just playing by myself because there's no servers anymore.
Yeah, I want to see that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Funny enough, I did try to set up a playing with Sam Witwer, who plays that kind of character in Force Unleashed and other voice acting, of course, Maul and such. Yes, and then Star Wars is one of the things that when I first got into my passions as an industry, into writing, just for fun. In the early days of Screen Rant, and Star Wars was one of those pillars. And this was it was an interesting time because it was years before Disney acquired Lucasfilm, the Star Wars license, and it was us back then talking about all the hopes and dreams. What if George Lucas wrote those treatments for episodes 7 through 12, and all the hypotheticals and the video games and such. So from beginning to end, from childhood through being a teen, through my games and comics and books and movies to now a career, to now today talking with you gentlemen about it. Star Wars has been there for me since the beginning. So it's just a part of me. So it's a weird thing to say, but it's part of my weird DNA, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, no doubt. Justin, I feel like you and I have talked about Star Wars throughout our friendship, and I know it means as much to you as it does to Rob and myself. Why don't you take a little bit of time and kind of give your history with the franchise?
Yeah, I think I grew up probably around a similar age as Rob, where there was nothing. It was like, okay, 4, 5, and 6 are out there, and we've got the expanded universe. There's video games, there's books, novels coming out, comics. But what if there was more? That was always like in the back of our minds as kids playing with lightsabers, just endlessly rewatching 4, 5, and 6. And there was that huge gap in the 90s. And then we had episode 1 announced. And I think the prequels had a really big impact on me getting back into Star Wars, where I was kind of lax a little bit. But also the other big thing for me was in 2013, I met my wife, and she had a huge Darth Vader poster on her wall. And I was like, oh, okay. And she ended up getting a Darth Vader tattoo on her back. But
and that was it, right? It was love at first sight. Like there was nothing else you needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her love of Darth Vader actually kind of brought me around a little bit. And then 7, 8, 9 came out. So that also kind of re-sparked that flame in me. But yeah, like Rob, it had always been my favorite. It was way before Star Trek, way before I got into any other franchises. It was Star Wars, the very first, the granddaddy, as Kevin said earlier. So it's always been part of my DNA as well. And video games, comic books, everything, just immersing myself in Star Wars has always been a love of mine. And with these new, the sequels, prequels, and then everything else, now we have all the TV shows on Disney Plus. It's just never been a better time, I think, to be a Star Wars fan.
Can I jump in and add one more thing there?
Yeah.
What's interesting is during this gap time we're talking about, when there was no new movies per se, but even pre episode 1 in 99, we had I remember getting the VHS trilogy before they did the special editions. And on it, they added these early 90s George Lucas interviews where he was talking about doing the prequels. And I remember rewatching the interview over and over again, thinking about all the details. At the same time, again, in a weird gap period, there was a big amount of video games happening. And now the Legends material, there was the Jedi Academy books, there was the Timothy Zahn books, and all that stuff was happening. Yes. But for me, it was not to mention X-Wing Alliance again, but there was the X-Wing game, TIE Fighter, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, and then the early console games. And it was so much content. And then when overlapping all that stuff, we got into the Shadows of the Empire era, where they started experimenting with multimedia. And in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is about to explode. And funny enough, it did, just in a way no one would have expected, because it ended up having nothing to do with all that material. But it's funny,
No, I'm. So it's funny listening to you guys talk about this, because I feel like I'm right there with you. So we are a generation that was probably born after Star Wars came out in theaters. So if Adam was here, he would talk about how that was one of the first movies that he saw in theaters. And, my dad, I hear him all the time talk about there was nothing like it at the time, having to stand in line and people out, blocks around the theater and stuff like that. And just, it was a movie that's probably a lot like Jurassic Park for us. When I think about how it changed cinema.
Oh yeah.
Star Wars did that. So we're all coming into this in the VHS world, the blockbuster world, and all that kind of stuff. And for me, Star Wars was the impetus of my geekdom. It wasn't Superman. It wasn't comic books. It wasn't Marvel. It wasn't video games. It was Star Wars. I mean, I have memories just sitting on the floor 4 inches from the TV, just watching that Star Destroyer chasing the Corellian ship and the opening of New Hope, and just being like, oh, this is unbelievable. This is I want to live here. I want to live in this galaxy. I know it's Civil War and it's probably not that much fun, but man, I want to live here. And Shadows of the Empire, that multimedia series, I was totally into. Dash Rendar instantly became one of my favorite characters. I must have played the Shadows of the Empire game on, I think it was N64.
Yep.
Yeah. 100 times daily. I mean, it's cause I was not I wouldn't classify myself as a big gamer. I was more of I played Madden. I was more of a sports game guy, but Shadows of the Empire, that was my game. I just, all of it. And, when I was in 8th grade, the assignment was write a 5-paragraph essay on anything. I wrote mine on George Lucas and how he impacted the world of Hollywood. What 8th grader writes, and you can't do that in 5 paragraphs, by the way. I'm just gonna let everybody know it's impossible. But one of the things, and I'll show it here on the camera here for our YouTube audience, I mean, I have when they started re-releasing the Hasbro line in stores, the action figures. My mom, like, I love my mom. I love her to this day because she like went to Toys R Us and everywhere and just like bought these things. And like some of the ones that were hard to find, like she would leave work and there was like a mom network and it was like, oh, there's a Yoda at Target, wherever. And like, they get them. And so like, I have all the extra, I still have them today. They're in a bunch of tubs sitting in my attic. I can't wait to, as my kids get older, I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I can't wait for them to like get them down and like play with them and just stuff like that. Like it is to me, Star Wars is everything. And so I'm going to dive into the next part of this as we reminisce. And that's like that feeling, that moment when Disney buys Star Wars. It's now part of the Disney universe. They announce immediately that we're getting an episode 7. You see the picture. There's Luke there. There's Leia. There's Han. I remember it vividly when it came out online, and like it shows Andy Serkis. It's a gray photo, black and white photo. Everybody's there. They're reading the script. J.J. Abrams is in there. And I'm thinking, like, I can't believe we're doing this. This is happening. And I bought in hook, line, and sinker on The Force Awakens, but I'm going to say a controversial thing. As I've watched the sequel trilogy over and over for the past few years, especially now that it's over, the disappointment for me is just, it felt like there wasn't a lot of, like, it was like everybody was approaching each movie as a single film. And I feel like if they had kept directors for the like if JJ had started with 1 and ended with 3 and did 2, there may have been some more cohesiveness. There may have been a lot of strategies that were introduced early on that may have come out. And I liked what Ryan did, but I also don't like what he did. And it was like, so I struggle with that. So I'm going to, before I start diving and get on a whole sermon about the sequel trilogy, what did you guys feel like, after the prequel trilogy? There's those gaps, right? We talked about the 90s gap. Then there was like this 2000s gap to where the sequel trilogy comes out. What did you guys feel like when that happened? I'll let any of you take that one.
Rob, you go ahead.
My memories are defined by what has the most emotional impact. So I think what immediately comes to mind is what the era you're talking about, like the hype of seeing. Well, there's two factors here. One is their initial announcement, right? And I'll never forget this because when it was announced, and it was basically Halloween 2012, and I'll never forget because I landed my first time traveling to Australia. I went to London, England to do my first ever Marvel set visit for Thor: The Dark World. Cool. They let me go, and I was supposed to go from there to Australia, but I had to go home. Get this, because I was hosting my first Halloween party in years, and I had this like custom Hawkeye outfit. Not to talk about Marvel stuff. And then so I was there for a day of Halloween. I went straight to Australia, which is like 25 hours of flying right, between all the stops. I land. I get to my hotel, open my laptop up. Disney buys Lucasfilm, Star Wars, and I'm just like, what? It happened like hours before, and I'm just catching up on all the craziness. And that was, to me, it was so hype because there was immediately all these like trades and reports saying, oh my gosh, Lucas, again, I mentioned it earlier, has treatments for 712 allegedly, and all this cool stuff and all these memories, everything we talked about up front. It's like all these things as a kid. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're actually going to do it. These icons I grew up with, but wasn't old enough when they were in theaters. We will get our time to see Luke, Leia, and Han on screen together. What happens after they defeated the Empire? What is the new status quo? Are they doing the Jedi Academy stuff? And there is so much excitement. And then over time, that excitement goes, for those listening, my hands are going down, a downtrend.
Downtrend, yeah.
But yeah, when that first movie came out, mega hype. And I'll never forget, this was sort of tied into Screen Rant being acquired by Valnet. So at that point, all of us who were running Screen Rant, like, really got to stretch our fingers and show these guys what we can do with Star Wars, right? And I'll never forget, we were features. There's so much hype and mystery around characters like Kylo Ren, but the old characters like Mark Hamill's Luke Skywalker. What are they doing? We wrote these features that were literally read by millions of people around the world, like articles that were like some of the biggest articles we've ever written. Millions of people wanting to know everything they could about the Knights of Ren, which ended up meaning nothing.
Nothing.
It's just ridiculous. Yeah. So the hype factor was so extreme. And then when that first movie came out, it was and I enjoyed seeing the first movie in theater. It was a fun ride. Seeing the Falcon do all this stuff, it was cool. Meeting these characters, and they did a great job casting some of these like wonderful characters who are in their own right. They literally have become icons, whether, we can measure up how they compare against the old characters. That's a different thing. But they did something big. And to me, even though it was like, here's episode 4 again, but you've seen it all before, and also we're ignoring what happened in the other trilogies. It's just weird. And then, we can dissect our issues with the follow-ups later. But yeah, so hype was extreme going into it. And as each movie came out, there was more and more problems. And it became clear that, hey, maybe having a vision and a plan and giving fans what they want is more important than a release date because of shareholders, you know what I mean? And licensing. And you guys can look up, as well documented, before The Force Awakens at theaters, I think they made like $10 billion in licensing. It paid for itself. So at that point, there was fighting among release dates, right? I think J.J. Abrams had to push it back compared to what Disney and Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm wanted to do because of release date and shareholders. Like, and as part of that process, they threw out, you guys know this, like the script by Michael Arndt, and who wrote Toy Story 3 or whatever back then. And that's weird because they got further and further away from give us the original heroes, continue the story. And it became this thing where it's like, no, let's do new characters and tell the same story again, but not as good potentially.
So many things in life, and I can say this because I work for a publicly traded company, is when short term is the goal, it really narrows the vision of something, and everything becomes myopic from there. And it's so results driven that you just don't sometimes realize that if you take a breath, this could be something really fantastic. And it was, again, I don't blame Disney. They were falling on the hype as much as we were on the other end of it. But to your point, like, yeah, how many times Justin and I were just talking about the DCU announcements the other day, and just like how much vision Gunn and Safran have been able to cast in a 3-month time span, with the right leadership, with Zaslav there at Discovery, Warner Brothers and stuff like that, to be able to buy into this and not say, hey, we are focused on the short term. It is more of a long-term thing. And I'm convinced everybody just needs Kevin Feige. Like, go find a Kevin Feige, make that the person who owns this, is the sole vision of this, and just believe that the ROI will be there. That it's Star Wars, for Christ's sake. Like, you know what I mean? So,
Vactor, before you jump in there, sorry to keep delaying this interruption. But yeah, if you did talk about DCU, you see that's another example of like they tried to do short-term catch-up for years.
Exactly.
They cycled through it 2 or 3 times, and it was
exactly.
And they burned IP, they burned deals, and their ROI was not there. Despite how much money they spent. Yeah. Exactly. And the same thing with Star Wars. And you remember the plan for Star Wars after the saga was gear up. Let's follow the Marvel model because money. And we'll do 2 movies a year. We'll have anthology films every year. We'll do a saga film every 2 years. We'll just keep it going.
That's right.
We'll add more. And they completely failed. So much so that the movies stopped. And the director of 2 of those movies hasn't directed a movie since. So, yeah. Anyways,
he's going through his own stuff. Like, and that's a podcast for another day, because I have a love-hate relationship with JJ, and I think he's done a lot of great things for us as fans. But Vactor, you got the mic, man. Let's hear kind of some of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, that was, like I said, the time when I was dating my wife. So a lot of my memories are tied up to that. And we were both, when we saw that first trailer, and that was one of those things where I didn't watch trailers. I wanted to go in cold on everything, and we were like, no, we're making an exception to the rule for Force Awakens. So we watched our hype train we were on 12 out of 10, when that first trailer came out, and we both ended up loving Force Awakens, where we saw it 6 times in the theater. And we were bringing different people back. Okay, we're going to bring her sister. Okay, we're going to bring her parents. Okay, we're going to bring my parents. So we were I had 2 friends that we brought. So we were just bringing different people and saying, oh, we want to experience this with other people. So it was a huge event for us. But I think a lot of what you guys are saying is how I felt as well, where I love pieces of them, 7, 8, 9. I love 7 individually. I love 8 individually. I don't want to talk about 9, but as a whole, 7, 8, 9, it's not. They don't feel cohesive at all. They don't feel like they were made in the same intent, the same direction and focus. So I think that's the biggest disappointment overall, is just the lack of cohesion with 7, 8, 9, where, and they had a lot of struggles with Carrie Fisher passing away and things like that, but it was still, it just felt like it was the upper levels that kind of derailed the train that we were on, the tracks that we were on. So I loved episode 7 when it came out, much like JJ's Star Trek. When that came out, I was like, oh, this is going to be the franchise is in good hands. This is going to be great. We're going to have all these sequels. And nothing ever equaled that first Star Trek, that first Chris Pine, Kelvin timeline movie after that. So I felt like JJ did a great job setting up what was, there's all these mysteries. There's going to be someone else will answer them, but JJ is the one who's going to set them up, and just nothing got resolved. I can't think of anything that was set up in Force Awakens that was resolved in a good way. I can't think of one thing.
No, not one thing. And, I was trying to think of something as you guys are talking about this, and now my brain trailed off into thinking about The Force Awakens. I have a similar, real quick, Justin, to you as it relates to you dating your now wife. My wife and I were actually engaged when Force Awakens came out, and she was in grad school at the time, and I had bought tickets for her and my family here and for our local theater for the like Wednesday night, first screening night. And she's like, well, I don't know if I'm going to make it because I've got to present in my grad school class. So she was able to get the first presentation, and she's like across town. She gets to the theater like 2 minutes before the crawl starts. And that's when I knew, like, this girl really loves me. like she wants to be with me, because she like made an effort to get here because this was important to me. And like, you guys don't know my wife, but like, she could care less about any of this stuff. like that's one of the reasons why I married her, is because like she doesn't care about any of these things. She enjoys them because I enjoy them. Like, and she loves the Marvel films because she likes the overarching story and how they all connect, but she likes the individual stories too, and the characters and stuff like that. I think about Star Wars, and I go back to George Lucas, and you hit on something, Vactor, about this. The new sequel trilogy films were really good as individual movies, but as a saga-based 3-episode trilogy, it just doesn't connect. And, Lucas got a lot of crap for the prequels. Now, we were kids, so to speak, when those were coming out, becoming, teenagers and then going into college. I feel like the prequels now have a lot of legs. There's a generation behind us that has really fallen in love with those movies. But you think about Lucas in that he always just it's all about this, the Pitch podcast here. It's all about what is the story you want to tell. George Lucas wanted to tell a family drama in space. And that's really what Star Wars is. And this sequel trilogy, I feel like they were trying to answer too many fanboy questions and not focus on that family drama. Like, they try to do a little bit with Kylo Ren, and there's a lot in his character that's there that makes for a good family drama. But like that mystery box mentality of JJ, I feel like this is where it really bit him in the butt as it relates to how he likes to tell these stories. So I'm going to stop there. Like, what do you guys think about that as it relates to, do you think that these would have been better if Lucas was captaining the ship? I mean, lots been documented about what his treatments look like. You can go online and see kind of what the differences were and stuff like that. There was the twins and sons of Leia, and not twin sons, but daughter and son of Leia and Han, things like that. But, JJ was fascinated with the question of, where is Luke Skywalker? That was all he cared about. That was the question he wanted to answer. And I don't know if we really got a great answer. So unpack that for me, boys.
Yeah, the core of your question is this: would it have been a better result if Lucas was still in charge, essentially? And the answer is yes. Because if he had a person in charge who also happens to be the filmmaker, right? It wouldn't be shareholder, Disney, Lucasfilm, Kennedy, director fighting for release date, it would be George.
That's right.
It. By default, you win, because even if we don't love the story, he gets to tell the full story. And those movies don't happen until he's done the story, and he already wrote them down. So like, and you also know, because it's his story, he would honor more than these guys did what came before. Now, one of the biggest failings of the new trilogy is that they don't respect the core characters and their accomplishments, but they don't respect what the status quo was. They don't tell a new story. You look at the prequels now, to go back to your other point, that's so different than the original trilogy. And it set up and fleshed out those iconic characters and told Vader's origin and explained how the Empire and Palpatine came into command, but it did so in a completely different way. We saw the Senate. There were multiple sequences of politicking, right? We saw
the beauty of the inner rim and the core planets and just how, like, it wasn't a used universe like what we pick up in the original trilogy.
Totally. We saw an entirely different faction of warriors from the battle droids, which are goofy, and we saw different species and completely different locations. It was before Tatooine got overused, but they used it well enough. And then, and even how they unfolded what we know of the Jedi and the Sith or dark side, depending how you want to look at it. It was all different, and it felt new. And at the time, again, we were teenagers at this time. Like, I'll never forget, like, that episode 1, despite all the complaints from old fans at the time, that pod racing sequence,
dude,
was
still great. My 3-year-old,
my dad loves that. And
Christian, my 3-year-old, I let him watch it the other day. He hasn't watched the whole movie because he doesn't have like the attention span to do it. But like that pod race scene, like he was all in. Like he was like, "What is that?" And I was like, "That is pod racing."
Sabalba all day. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And then our Ben Quadraneros. Oh man, another great game. I'll never forget Nintendo Power getting that rare cover.
Yeah,
these are good times. But dude, the Naboo, the hangar doors opening, and who do you got there? Maul, double lightsaber. Duel the Fates music. Let's go. Like nothing. See, years.
Lucas knew two things. He knew what kids wanted to see, and that was his core audience. He knew what was going to make a great toy, but then he also knew what, like you said, he had a vision. He was going to execute it. Nobody could tell him otherwise. Even if there was people in the room like Rick McCallum or somebody, they were like, "Oh, this is going to suck." But it wasn't about telling a Godfather story and having those layers of writing. It was, hey, this is the version of Star Wars people haven't seen yet that I want to show, and because you think about that line from Obi-Wan in New Hope where he talks about, for 1,000 generations, the Guardians were or the Jedi were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. We wanted to see that, and he gave us that. And it's like people complained about it, and it's like, why? It's right there. Like, and you see all the stuff that Dave Filoni's done and Favreau have done now. I feel like those two guys have really honored what, especially Filoni, who basically interned under Lucas and really has taken what Lucas created and expanded it. All the work he's done with the Mandalorian history, what he did with the Clone Wars and all that stuff that happened between Clone Wars and Revenge of the Sith. You saw what he did with Rebels. He is, like, to me, put those two guys in charge and let's move on. You know what I mean? Like, nothing against Kathleen Kennedy. She's one of the greatest producers Hollywood's ever had. But I criticize whether or not she's the right person to kind of captain the ship. But I guess you need somebody who's got that producer power that can handle Disney, to your point, and the shareholders.
You also need, like, I go back and forth on that. I mean, that's a very common perspective. The difference maker here is, like, Kathleen Kennedy can push projects through. She makes things happen, and she made Andor happen, which under any other regime may have never happened. And to me, that's the best thing in Star Wars, right? I'm going to disagree with you on Filoni and Favreau, though.
Okay.
Because I've had the great pleasure of attending premieres with him and going and interviewing him and doing many things with him. He is the apprentice of George Lucas, and what he's done in animation is incredible. Like Clone Wars, despite the start of it not being for me, it got better and better and better, and it fleshed out like who the clones are, why they did what they did, the Jedi, a tough ask in introducing Ahsoka, and then making an Ahsoka a core pillar of Star Wars now, which is incredible because she's legitimately an amazing fleshed out character because she's got the screen time and got the development, and they learned from their mistakes and improved the character and how they use her, right? So, and now we get her in live action. It's so exciting. But then some of the stuff they've done with handling certain types of characters in live action, and some of the things in Mando, it's gotten a little too. This is derailing the conversation, but it's gotten a little too gimmick and member berry heavy in a negative light, and I think that led to the Book of Boba Fett, which is to me one of the lowlights of Star Wars, in almost every possible way: production design, to storytelling, to use of character. So I don't know. It's tough. I feel like I would say give this franchise to the Gilroy family, because they can take
Andor,
because they can take. You don't.
And
need
honestly, the rewrites he did on Rogue One were phenomenal, and there's a lot written about what he was doing behind the scenes. I thought Gareth Edwards did a phenomenal job directing that movie, and it was, I think, Rogue One and Andor and Mandalorian. Those three for me have really stood out as the best that we've seen of Star Wars under the Disney banner. And Justin, you're nodding your head here on camera. I know you got a lot to say with what Rob and I have been talking about. What's on your mind?
Well, I love Dave Filoni, and it's crazy to me the way that the prequels have almost done a full 180 from the fan perspective that we grew up with of George Lucas killed my childhood, George Lucas raped my childhood, and then to the point now where we're like, oh, wait a minute. Instead of the sequel, can we go back to the prequels? Can we go back to that time period because of what has come afterwards? And I think you just got to give George Lucas credit for his, I think 100%, the biggest thing that comes out of the prequels is the world building and expanding the universe and things that, we can make whole episodes off of just like a line, or just a little piece of dialogue. So the prequels, a lot of stuff in there has come around now that we appreciate it more. I think that the thing that was so, maligned at the time was the dialogue. That was the thing I always heard was, the sand, it gets everywhere, all of that stuff. The Jar Jar
Binks, everything.
There was some rough edges of the prequels, but I think overall it was and episode 3, I think we're going to talk about our kind of favorite films a little bit later, but episode 3, like if the entire prequel had been like episode 3 is, I don't think we would be talking about, oh, there was some bad stuff with Jar Jar Binks and all that stuff. I thought episode 3 is one of my favorite films in the entire franchise. So I think also the prequels had the benefit of, like we talked about, those animated series and those years of storytelling have propped up that era and that timeline. So I think we have a much fonder view of it now in 2023 than we did in 2003. So the benefit of, like you said with Ahsoka, being able to tell her story and flesh her out, you had that with the clones the same way. All of the, I didn't care anything about the clones in live action, but once you had the animated series, then it was, okay, these are people, they have emotions.
Names, Cody and Rex and all this stuff.
Yeah. So I loved all of that stuff. I think I'm a little bit, the Book of Boba Fett, I only choose to remember the Mando parts of Book of Boba Fett. The rest of it, I don't know if I'll ever rewatch those parts, but the Mando stuff, Luke and
I think
Grogu,
that's Rob's point, right? Like that the best episode of a show is not even about the main character. And it's basically a Mandalorian, or 2 episodes. The Mandalorian season 2.5, right? Like that's what you got in those 2 episodes. And I
don't know what was the goal of Book of Boba Fett? Like, who was?
I think they were capitalizing on trend. I think they had him as a secondary character in season 2 of Mandalorian. Fans got excited. They read the room and they said, "Okay, let's pump out a Boba Fett series and let's go back."
And it was their answer. It was their answer. They had a Boba Fett script in the back burner back when the anthologies were going to be a thing.
Right.
That's right. They took that anthology script and kind of scaled it down. Yeah.
The premise of the Josh Trank thing with him and Simon Kinberg, I believe, were supposed to, and this is mixing up names here, to be doing a Boba Fett thing. And the goal was to turn him into a perpetual character who's now an anti-hero, right? And it could be a new character wearing the mask. That was one of the things. Like that's how they would pass the lineage.
Or
what
like
they
the
did
Dread
instead
Pirate
was,
Roberts or something like that.
yeah,
Like
but when they introduced Mando, it's cool. He's like a warrior monk, cool, and he could be a different character than Mando. And what did they do in his own show? Make him the same soft daddy as Mando. He could have been the anti-hero hunter going out and settling crimes around the universe, being the opposite of the bounty hunter. He's the guy who takes out the bounty hunters and people around him. No, he's going to be on what planet? Tatooine. He's going to chill there on these fake sets with the fake backgrounds with all the characters in their super polished, clean clothing who clearly have never been to a desert before. And then we'll throw in Mando. And what we'll do with Mando? The worst thing Filoni does, member berries. We'll give him an N1 starfighter because you guys remember Naboo, right? Remember those fighters? We'll give him a ship where there's no bathrooms and a transport ship that's not a transport. It's just ridiculous. It infuriates me even thinking about it.
Well, I wonder how much of that was.
I can
Robert
tell, Rob,
Rodriguez.
you've got some passion there.
How much, Rob, do you think was Robert Rodriguez in that?
Well, certainly the action sequences were him. But this weird reliance on doing things under budget using the volume, and like the volume is supposed to be a great tool to enhance scenes. It has become the backbone of these productions, and it's become these. Even a lot of the scenes in Mando Hotel are incredibly small scale and ugly, and it ruined a lot of scenery in Obi-Wan Kenobi as well, especially episode 2. Go back and watch the directions they run in episode 2. It's a circle.
Compared to Andor.
With the horrible extras, there's no planning for a real situation, which is, again, to bring back to Gilroy's, location, real extras with purpose, storytelling, background characters matter. Something every other Star Wars is failing at. Anyways, yeah, so
yeah.
That's kind of kind of the ultimate failing of Boba Fett, I think.
Here's what we're going to do to keep things moving. I want to jump into some of these categories real quick. All right. So most rewatchable film in the entire franchise. We'll keep this to, well, I'll open up to any of the movies. So I'll start. For me, it's Empire Strikes Back. I just, like, any day of the week, it doesn't matter what I'm feeling, I could throw on Empire Strikes Back. It was the one I hated as a kid, believe it or not, because it was just like the longest and most boring. And I more preferred Return of the Jedi just because I liked the action and the pacing of Return of the Jedi. But I think once I hit probably 14, 15 years old, like, it was Empire, and it's been Empire since. And I love Empire. I love everything about it. I love the meat grinder that the characters go through. I love, the scene with Han and Leia. I love you. I know. I do that with my wife all the time. There's something about Empire for me. It's a great middle act. It's a great self-contained film. And I know, like, that's a classic answer. There's a lot of people, a lot of cinephiles that think Empire is not just a good Star Wars movie. It's a good movie. But yeah, I love Empire. For me, that's my most rewatchable. I would tell you my second one's Rogue One. I love Rogue One. It's a great movie. I could probably find some nitpicks about it, but it's a great movie.
Go ahead, Vactor.
So, like I said, I saw Force Awakens 6 times in the theater. So there is a certain rewatchability for me on that film. But
it's a good one.
Overall, I have to say A New Hope. That was the one that it got, the ball rolling. It was the one that it could have been self-contained. Like, if there was no sequels, it could have existed on its own. And we have that to thank for our Star Wars fandom. So I think episode 4 for me is the most rewatchable, but I do have to give an honorable mention to episode 3 because I could not get enough of that one in the theater also. And it was everything that I wanted the prequels to be. And I don't know. There's something, the feeling that I get when I watch episode 3, it just makes me feel like, oh, this is good. This is like something substantial that I can latch onto.
I think my answer mimics Kevin's basically. I mean, it's hard to fault the original trilogy. It holds up, and there's something to be said about pre-planning and using real assets versus reliance on CGI, which hurts a lot of the prequel stuff, especially episode 1, right? But so by nature it is. Plus, for me, my answer will be episode 4. It's A New Hope, because it's by design the only one that's truly standalone. And it combines something the original trilogy does so well. It combines iconic moments, the quality of the whole product, but executing on key scenes, right? So you got to remember, there's so many crazy scenes in the first movie, like the breaking Leia out of the Death Star, the trash compactor scenes, just iconic moments that are so ahead of their time in a way. Even if they obviously there's a lot of inspiration behind a lot of these sequences, but like think of the Falcon on the escape when Luke and Han get into the gun turrets, and you're like, just mind-blowing stuff, right? And of course the Death Star trench run, the X-Wings opening up their wings as they approach the Death Star with the Y-Wing bombers from Yavin, and oh my gosh, that's the Jedi Temple they're flying out of. And it's like just things that are just so, when you look back, like, wow. Or like how dark it was at Luke's poor Aunt Beru. Like, they just, you know what I mean? Like all the stuff that happened at Tatooine in the beginning, like the flow of that story to like meeting this old wizard and getting little hints of lore, which mean everything later on. Like nothing compares to that. So, and in modern era, I would also say Rogue One, same thing. Big batch of characters you never met before. Each character matters. There's so much behind each character with limited screen time. They execute so flawlessly. And unlike most of Star Wars, especially modern era, there are real stakes. The characters take their situation seriously and they act logically and accordingly. And it shows you who the true heroes are. This is one of the biggest failings of other Star Wars stories that Rogue One answers and Andor follows. So for me, it's definitely those two.
Rob Key's still buying on the Gilroys, the Gilroy family in there.
You know it.
The scene in Rogue One that I got to call out, there's a lot of them that are good, but the one I love the most is just when she's listening to the recording of her father talking about how he hid, the weakness in the Death Star and how emotional he is about, being a broken man and having to fake it and all that kind of stuff. Like that to me, like going back to when you approach a story, it's about first and foremost, like what is the character mean to you as the writer? And then what is the story you want to tell? We were talking about that the other day, Vactor, about Superman and James Gunn very vulnerably coming out. And there was some great stuff that's even come out today about just what Superman means to him and stuff. And, it starts there. And so I love those moments in movies when characters can be vulnerable and you feel vulnerable watching them. And again, not to crap on the sequel trilogy, I just didn't feel like we had any of that, while having this epic action, fun, entertaining 2-hour movie that's, not a waste of time. And because they do have those, none of those movies are a waste of 2 hours of your time. You're going to be entertained. But if that's the bar, then, okay. So anyway.
Can I add one more thing? Because for this, since we're delving deep into Star Wars here, that needs to be said. If you love Rogue One as much as what we're saying here, there's a book called Catalyst. I don't know if you guys have read this. But it's a prequel to Rogue One, which is a prequel to A New Hope. And it actually, just like Rogue One enhances the experience of watching A New Hope and helps fill in the gaps and explain the character behind it, Catalyst is the same thing for Galen Erso and Krennic and explains what some of the dark stuff that went on with the creation of the Death Star in the early days and how it ties into the Geonosians and it's just crazy, really cool Star Wars lore that answers and enhances some of the things the prequels are doing even further, which is also interesting.
Yes.
Love it. All right. What has aged best and worst for you guys as it relates to Star Wars? And that's kind of a tough question because you could pick something from the original trilogy that may have aged the best and may have aged the worst. And, but unpack that however you want. I feel like there's some good answers here.
Well, mine is original trilogy. When I thought about this question, I thought about the original trilogy. So for me, what aged the best was the universe, the world building. And I think what Rob was talking about when he was describing episode 4, that's why I think it's the most parodied movie of all time. Those scenes, every scene is so iconic, and I feel like there's no wasted space in that movie. So the world building, the universe, just the overall Star Wars entity, I think, has aged the best because it's just only getting better with time. We look back at that movie and we're still analyzing it. I think it's the same way with Back to the Future for me, where it's like every time I go back and rewatch it and I'm like trying to find a flaw, it's like, oh man, what I thought it didn't work, it does work. And it made me think about it again. That was the same thing with episode 4. So every time I think about it, it gets better with age. The thing that does not get better with age is there are certain things that we like to think it was already planned out in advance. We like to think that, oh yeah, it was already written. But there are clearly things that got changed along the way. And for me,
I know where you're going.
The Luke and Leia relationship, and there were multiple kisses that happened in the course of the first 2 films. And there was, I'm blanking on the name of it. There was a book that came out, Splinter of the Mind's Eye or something like that, where there was some heavy, you could tell that Leia and Luke were supposed to have a romantic relationship between them. So there were things that you want to, like I said, you want to believe that everything was written out. Oh, it was nice. But no, it was, as it was going along, things were changed. And I believe the Luke and Leia relationship does
Vactor,
not
I just think things are maybe just a little different in a galaxy far, far away. They don't conform to the same standards as we do here on Earth.
Maybe.
So maybe that's what's really going on. I'm just messing with you, dude. Yeah, I think for me, the things that have aged the best is, I'm going to copycat some of your question, is I just think like the stories themselves have aged the best. You know, these are hero journey stories. They're copied every day. You watch a blockbuster movie in the theater. You know, it's almost like it's like film school 101. Just like sit down and see how the hero's journey is built. I think from a pacing perspective, like movies in the 70s weren't made like that, right? Like the pacing was very slow. It was very, you know, go watch The Godfather, which came out around the same time. Like it's a very different kind of pacing. And this movie could have been that. I mean, even the Star Trek films, like you watch the first Star Trek movie, it was boring. Like, you know, V'ger and all that stuff. It just is like something happened, please. This movie was like an adrenaline ride from day one. And so for me, those things that make Star Wars have aged the best. I still think like the whole used universe, the practical effects, all the creature makeup, all the things that went into making that movie, which were all these film school nerds that were just like, I don't know if we can do this. I don't know if we're going to pull it off, but you know what? Might as well go ahead and do it. And, you know, I've seen documentaries. We've all seen the same ones. Like, you know, they had football fields of Matchbox kits on ping pong tables, and they were just running a truck, you know, to get the camera footage over it. And then, you know, exploding firecrackers. And that's how they got the, you know, the Death Star, you know, scenes where they're running lasers on the Death Star. I mean, it's just like, how creative is that? Like just doing things that just had never been done before. And to me, it still ages the best, better than any CGI. And in terms of what's aged the worst, you said it earlier, the dialogue in the prequel trilogies, I do like the prequel trilogies a lot more now than maybe I did in kind of a season of my life. But yeah, that dialogue still gets a little rough. And I can't handle little Anakin Skywalker. I don't, that's like, instead of making him 10, like make him 15 years old, please. Like, or 16 or 17, like the age he was in the Attack of the Clones, that would have been a good start. But like to have this little whiny 10-year-old boy, I don't know. I'm not a fan of that. And it's still a hard one to watch. I'm going to leave Jar Jar. That's just is what it is. So.
Yeah. The thing with Annie, you can't go too old because he's going to be even way too old to start Jedi training, which is the issue. Even when he was 10, they were saying he was too old. So I think the problem was just writing because, like, I don't want to fault the actor, but, like,
but if he's the Virgins, who cares, like, how old he is, right? Like,
it's true. Well, if only they explain what this prophecy meant a little better in this franchise, they could have taken advantage of that. But
midi-chlorians may have been something that they should never have brought in.
Oh, what a failure.
Yeah.
It's just the amount of blood cells you have, man. That's all it is. Look, I kind of answered this before. I kind of got into it talking about A New Hope, but it is what you guys are saying. For me, what holds up best is the original trilogy because they built it. They did kit bashing to build starships and sets, and they actually built sets and the characters. They went into a cantina and they had characters wearing masks, and it seemed ridiculous and weird when they were making it, but it ended up and it still holds up better than most stuff now. And now, again, going back to the volume, you have like 3 rocks and a stepping stool, and like, yeah, we'll fix it in post. They don't even give them full costumes anymore. It's so ridiculous. So the more we get back to that, the better. That applies to the whole original trilogy. I think it holds up the best. And you're right, though, Vactor. The weird incestuous stuff is a little bit much, but it's certainly no Game of Thrones bad. But it's definitely annoying. You know, I wish that changed. You know, obviously the implications of that long term were important, but I kind of wish that was, you know, not the case. We didn't, you know, but it is what it is. It's part of the weird, awkward charm, I guess, of that period and what happened to those movies back then. What doesn't hold up, again, to kind of continue what I'm saying, is like the Clone Wars animated film. I think that almost buried the franchise.
Oh yeah.
That I remember when it came to theaters, I had friends go see it, and I was like, no,
I didn't even go see it.
No way.
I didn't even
I love Star Wars,
yeah.
but no, I think it got probably like a 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's disastrous.
Yeah.
And through years and sheer vigilance, they course corrected after a season or two and made that something really special. But wow, what a misfire to launch that franchise and continue Star Wars.
I'm going to be transparent. I actually didn't get into Clone Wars until after Rebels came out.
Oh wow.
So I started watching. I started watching Star Wars Rebels, and I said, wow, this is actually really good. It's starting to explain the Inquisitors, and it's, you know, what Darth Vader was up to. And this is all, you know, I can't remember chronologically. Maybe it's 5 years before New Hope, maybe a little bit further out than that. But it's like, oh, wow, there's a planet like this, Lothal, and there's a thief on here, and he's got Force, and there's other Jedi that have escaped Order 66 and all these things. And like Rebels for me had a lot to offer from here's what else is going on in this galaxy far, far away that's not about Luke and his family drama. And it connected a lot of dots for me. And then they brought in the Mandalorian stuff. And so then I start going to sites like Screen Rant and others, people were writing about this. I'm like, okay, I got to go back and watch some of the Clone Wars stuff, because maybe I missed a few things. And I like how they brought in characters like Saul Guerrera and, you know, just really fleshed out the clones and stuff like that. But I had to find some articles that were like, here's the episodes you don't need to watch. So there's probably a lot of Clone Wars stuff I haven't seen, because it's just like, I don't know if I would have had the patience for it. But, yeah.
I'll finish up my point by saying this, because it also touches on the Clone Wars. But I was going to say with the prequel trilogy, especially Attack of the Clones, in hindsight, the problematic execution of things, and we can talk about the CG effects in the prequels too, but like that really ages poorly over time. And I'm going to classify the entire new saga, like 7, 8, 9, as aging poorly. As much as I love seeing almost all of them, there are parts of each movie I really, really love. There were massive different types of story and character failings in each one, and then just the collection of failures, along with some beautiful execution in some things. Like, as much as I hate 9, they finally landed on like great lightsaber fights, and they handled droids in a better fashion, and they had some cool blaster sequences. And it's like, but the story behind these things, it's ridiculous, and there's canonical errors everywhere. And then The Last Jedi, same thing, really cool things, and then there's really goofy things, from the opening shot of that film with Poe's dumb X-wing, and then the Dreadnought captain saying, "We should have launched our TIE fighters 5 minutes ago," and me being like, "Well, why didn't you? This is your ship." And like the whole movie falls apart right away. And it's like, you're not following the laws of the of space battles here. It's just, you know,
not to mention the whole like running after the rebel ship in that movie. I feel like we're getting into nitpicks now, which is fine. But like,
oh yeah,
it kind of reminds me of the the runway sequence in Fast and the Furious 6 or whatever, Fast 6, where it was like it goes the longest runway in the history of the universe. It goes on for 10,000 miles until Gal Gadot falls off the plane. She's still alive, by the way. I'm just telling you.
Yeah, bring her back.
They'll bring her back.
11, I guess.
I saw episode 7 6 times. I saw episode 9 1 time, and I still have not seen it again.
I saw it twice. It's funny when you see movies like that, and this is a weird comparison to make, but it's sort of like the first Transformers movie Michael Bay did. You watch it, and you're like, oh, what? And there's so many like weird sequences in between, like a beautiful set piece, and then you have like just awfulness. But when you go the second time, you're like desensitized to the awfulness, and you're kind of like enjoy the moment. And there's so many like moments that are neat, but then there's something just infuriating, and it's like, as long as you don't think about the lore, what's going on behind the scenes, like, why are there 10,000 Final Order Star Destroyers? Where did people come from?
Where did the money come from to build all that? And like,
I thought the clones, it was a big problem trying to get these people. They're just there, and oh my gosh, guys,
dark magic.
But,
dark magic. Yeah, and not to mention the 10,000 exegol Sith acolytes or whatever those were in the stadium, which was really what was going on there. But just remember, the dark side is a pathway to many things, that some would find unnatural, including 15 snokeheads in a vat of water.
If they explain that in a satisfying way in Mandalorian or in Bad Batch or something, if there is something outside of it that makes episode 9 better, I will give them so much credit, because it's like you have to really work to fix that. Like, it just
who's the guy over at Lucasfilm that has that's his job? It's Pablo something. He's like the he's
Pablo
like
Hidalgo and the Lucasfilm story group, but clearly they had no control because they let little things, like even in episode 9 they had a TIE fighter enter hyperspace. The guy, they don't have hyperspace, they can't do that. They can't do that. Yeah. It's like little things. If they read the script, they saw one of them would have been like, no. And it's like no one cares. You know what I mean? So,
come on, Matt Martin.
Yeah, poor Matt.
Well,
seems like a sweet gig though.
I feel like we're ready. I feel like we've gotten into a lot of I feel like we could just do a whole podcast about just our love of Star Wars.
Just episode 9?
And maybe we should do that. We'll schedule that next. But before we get into our pitches, I just want to, for the audience, I want to read a couple of these in case they're not keeping track. Here's the lineup of upcoming Star Wars movies and TV shows. So you've got The Mandalorian Season 3, comes out March. It's our next big thing. You got the Young Jedi Adventures animated TV series that comes out. You got Star Wars Visions Volume 2. You got the Ashoka TV series, Skeleton Crew. You've got Andor Season 2, which I think just recently started production. You got The Acolyte. I don't know if this one's still happening. Maybe, Rob, is Lando? Is that still a series that's in development, or did they kind of push that one out?
Last time we asked about that, they said they're still waiting on Donald Glover being free to do that, but I don't know if that's actually going to happen right now.
What is Donald Glover doing? I can't imagine he's super busy. Is he?
With the great music videos. Well, he finished Atlanta, so I don't know.
He's doing that Hypno Hustler movie for Sony. He's that Spider-Man movie.
That's true. That's right. This is true. Honestly, I think they just kind of pulled the trigger on that too soon, and it just filled the slate. But I would not be surprised if something in the Solo or Star Wars story / Lando universe continues, and we could see that collection of characters come back. There are many loose, unfinished threads there in live action, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yep, absolutely. So we got Taika Waititi's Star Wars movie that's also in development. I believe the Patty Jenkins Rogue Squadron movie is still in development. I think, is she back on that one now that Wonder Woman's kind of dead for her? And I know she made a lot of scheduling to keep Wonder Woman, and now she's, I don't know. What is the story there?
Word on the streets that may be dead, at least for now. There's no development on that at the moment, but I don't know. If you ask Patty, she'll say something different, but
got it.
I think it's one of those creative different scenarios, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll see.
Yep. So there's also an untitled Damon Lindelof, Sharmeen Obaid Chinoy movie that's in development. We know nothing about it. I don't know anything about what direction it's going to go. Kevin Feige, the godfather of the MCU, he's got a Star Wars movie that has a status unknown at this point. J.D. Dillard, Matt Owens, they've got a movie that was canceled. Rangers of the New Republic TV series, I think that was part of a recently announced or previously announced slate that I also think is being canceled.
Yep.
You got the Rian Johnson trilogy that is somewhat up in the air, but I don't think I've seen anything that has stated that it is officially canceled. And now with Knives Out and all the success he's having there, I think I recently heard him talk about how he doesn't think it's dead. So who knows? That could be one where they're just letting some of the time, sort of happen. And some of the angst between half of the fan base towards Rian Johnson sort of dies a little bit. That's kind of my theory about that one. And we almost had the Game of Thrones guys, Benioff and D.B. Weiss. We almost had something from them, but they got canceled. And then Sean Levy, he has a Star Wars movie. So there's a lot of stuff. I don't know how any of it connects. I don't know what any of it is. None of us do. I think a lot of the investment right now is in kind of the corners the spinoffs, the little stories that they can tell, which, to be frank, before we get into this discussion, I 100% think that that's the right play with Star Wars. I think the mistake is to run off and start doing another set of Saga movies and things like that. I think one-off movies, I think these exploring unique characters within already, canonical events is more interesting. There's a lot of compelling stuff there. Rob, you've laid out that case pretty much this whole podcast. Give it to the Gilroys. Let them find more Andors. Let them find more characters that they can explore within these different eras of the Star Wars universe. But for the podcast today, I figured we three would be up to the challenge. If Kathleen called today and said, Kevin, Justin, Rob, we're doing another trilogy. And we need you guys to write this. We need you guys to create this. So you have to draw on what's been done before. You have to draw on the canon that's been laid out. You can pull from the EU, but we reserve the right to not allow you to use it if we don't think it's worth it. This is what I want you to pitch today. So that's what we're going to focus on. I got to be honest with you. Since the three of us started talking about this podcast, I've struggled. I've struggled trying to figure out which direction I would go with this.
Yeah.
And I think what makes it so hard is the sequel trilogy. And that's why I wanted to spend a lot of time talking about that up front, is because it's so chaotic and so all over the place and all the things we said. It is making a 10, 11, 12 for me a very difficult task. But we're going to do it. We're going to do it. So I'm going to hold my pitch last. Maybe I'll do it second. So I don't know.
I'll go last. I'll go last.
Okay, Rob wants to go last. So Vactor, we're going to put you on the spot.
Good.
You get the first run.
Well, it's good because mine's going to be the worst. So we'll get the worst one out of the way. I would love. So first of all, I don't think there's any world where Rob Keyes did not love the Knights of the Old Republic franchise.
Ooh, baby, good call.
I think the first Knights of the Old Republic story is my favorite story in all of Star Wars, just from start to finish. And I would love for a larger audience that doesn't play video games, that isn't going into the EU and isn't going into any other things outside of movies. I would love to have them get that feeling that I got from Knights of the Old Republic. And they're trying to do this with the High Republic, but I still don't. It's like it still feels kind of off to the side and not a mainstream thing. Like you ask somebody off the street, "Hey, what's the High Republic?" I don't think a lot of people are going to tell you what it is.
Yeah,
and I'm in Star Wars, and I don't even know what it is half the time. But I want to see that era, the era before the prequels, the era where the Jedi were just rampant throughout the universe. There's thousands of Jedis all over the place and lightsabers left and right. The height of their power, that's what I would like to see in live action. And even, I think, in the background, a Sith storyline, something about the creation of the Sith, the development of the Sith, and all the way up to the rule of two. Like, I want to see that because that's ground that hasn't been, plowed very much. So those are I think my pitch would be some type of High Republic, old Sith hybrid storyline to get that out to a live action audience.
All right, we're going to hold on to that one. We'll see if we'll buy or sell it in a minute. I'm going to give you guys my pitch.
Yeah.
So I'm going the opposite direction. I want to see 1,000 years past what happened in episode 9. 1,000 is an arbitrary number, but I just want to see a state of the galaxy where there's no history of the Skywalkers. There's no, in the terms of, they don't exist anymore. The legacy, all of that's gone. Even Rey, even all these characters, the galaxy is in a state of peace. So it somewhat mirrors a little bit of what you had in Knights of the Old Republic and what you have in this High Republic content that's in the books and stuff like that now. But it's after. And in my backstory, and again, I spent some time thinking about this. I love the idea. I still want to capture the sense of adventure, wonder, the nostalgia that the original trilogy had. So you're going to have a combination of the used universe feel and aesthetic, but also like what the prequel trilogies offered, which was that, here's what the core planets look like versus the Outer Rim and stuff like that. Like I want to see that, in various different ways. But I like the idea in this setting that Mandalore has been restored. That Mandalore now has become the guardians of peace and justice in this galaxy. And that, like our world today, where you have Buddhism, you still have pagan religions, you have Christianity, and there's even different variations of Christianity, Baptist, and, Presbyterian, Catholic, all these things. You have Judaism, you have different Orthodox. There's so many different sects of religion and different religions everywhere. But in the galaxy far, far away, it's like you got the Jedi and you got the Sith. Those are really the only two things that are around the Force. Now you have like your cults, you have your acolytes, and you have your, the Wills and stuff like that. But I like the idea that the Force is still around, but it's not a very popular thing. Everybody kind of thinks these people are like kind of crazy zealots and stuff like that. Like Rey didn't succeed in restoring the Jedi Order. It's kind of where I'm going with this. There's some people that subscribe to the Jedi way of thinking that are Force users on the light side, but I like the idea that the Skywalker name has now become a sect of light side users. They're called Skywalkers. You have dark side users. I feel like it would be interesting to explore not just the extreme polars of the light and dark side, but everything in the middle. And that to me is a very compelling backdrop of what I would love to see in a future story. On top of that, given that Mandalorian is so popular in our current pop culture, the idea of having Din Djarin's legacy sort of become the new Skywalker family drama story is interesting to me as well. You can start exploring things like the outer regions. In the EU, this is the one thing I'll pull from. I don't like the name of this group, but I like the concept behind them. There's this group called the Yushin Vong, who were essentially they were immune to the Force. And they were from a galaxy that actually was outside of the Star Wars galaxy, which I find is interesting. Like, what else is out there? And what happens if it's not a civil war anymore, but it's like a full-on invasion by this outside force? What would happen? So now you got this Mandalore, peacekeepers that have to join forces with the Force users, light and dark, to stop this outside force that has different weapons, different ways of doing things. And oh, by the way, the telekinetic stuff, Force energy things, all this stuff that these light and dark side users rely on for defense and everything, it's not really helpful to this force. That to me brings something different. So that's like the scope. That's the galactic conflict that we would arrive into. But then you still have a story that's around characters that are really interesting. So don't laugh. One of my characters I'm pulling from the EU right now is Dash Rendar. I want him in this series. He's my new Han Solo. I just think he would be such a kick-ass character. The Outriders, the new Millennium Falcon. And like this is the movie I want to see. And then, I like the idea of Jin. I mentioned Din Djarin's character. I like the idea of our main character being somewhat related to him and through his family line. I created a name. I use ChatGPT to just make names up. Bo Djarin. Could be a boy or a girl. I don't care. And just like this person is the heir to the throne of Mandalore. You have like this Game of Thrones type stuff going on with Mandalore because that's what happens. And that's really sort of my my core ideas as it relates to how I would approach a sequel trilogy. Is it allows you to get away from everything that sort of had already been done with the true Skywalker saga. You can expand on all the EU content that's usable and good, but you still have the ability to tell a story. I think the one thing you guys talked about in New Hope, which was so interesting, is it's a self-contained movie, but what's so cool is we're like coming in the middle of something, and so there's all this lore that we don't know. Like you reference, Luke meeting Obi-Wan, the wizard, and he's telling about, things that happened millions of years ago or thousands of years ago. Like, I like that idea of setting this new saga that far out so you can have that kind of same thing where we're kind of coming in the middle of something. So anyway, that's my pitch. That's I don't have a name for it. You could call it maybe the Invasion Saga or something along those lines. And I know it's not going to be a popular opinion because, there's a lot of fans out there that want to have Rey come back. They want to see, those characters because they were good characters. Maybe they just didn't have really good stories. But I think this is the better way to go. Distance yourself from all that. Start new, and just make a kick-ass, fun Star Wars movie.
I love it. I love how you guys are playing with history and the future here. I have so many thoughts on this. I'm going to pull a James Gunn here. It's a fine line because we are stuck with what came before. We can't just erase 7 and 9, which is, troublesome. So my thing is going to thread the needle a little bit. So I was thinking it's a few years after episode 9. Basically, when these films would come out in my head is when they would take place, right? So it's a few years later. Let's call it the Dark Forces trilogy. And I'll explain why. Because as much as I want to distance myself from the Force, I think that is the through line of all things Star Wars. So that's going to play a key factor in this. So I'm going to start by laying some groundwork if you guys don't mind. So two key locations to begin, right? One is, I believe it's pronounced Ossus, which is where Luke built his academy, right? It's where we see that in the Book of Boba Fett and their Mando spinoff episodes, right? It got wrecked in the Kylo Ren situation. But now, years later, it's an established village, a small town. It has a couple landing ports, but it's also where Rey is set up. It's got a library. It's got a research facility. And they've gone beyond the rules of the old Jedi. Rey took that to heart, right? There's no more dark side or light side. There's my side. Let's just do what's right. No more red tape. No more rules. No more traditional Jedi garb. No more non-relationships. That doesn't work. We saw what happened to the galaxy 3 times when that happens, right? So what she's doing, or some of her people are doing on this island, are gathering these artifacts. The things you see, like in Andor with Luthen's collection. There's all little Easter eggs there. And we saw this a lot in Rebels. There are Jedi temples everywhere. There are artifacts, light and dark, weapons and otherwise, everywhere. Uncontrolled. A lot of these things are on the black market. So she has teams that are going out, like almost like archaeologists, think Indiana Jones, or like the cool exploration scenes of like the darker scenes of Prometheus, that kind of vibe, right? They're finding things and collecting things. That's one location where that's set up. Second location, working with Rey, is sort of a starbase in an asteroid. I say asteroid because there are bases in X-Wing Alliance, the best video game ever. And in this base is where they have like their own sort of, think Rogue Squadron comics back in the day. They have their own contingent of assault ships, and they do missions. They're not there to start wars. They're there to help people when the government, the Senate, or that planet or that system can't help themselves. It could just be bandits. It could be a weather crisis, whatever it is. This faction is headed up by Poe. Poe's not a starfighter, dodging death at every second. He's just one of these guys helping orchestrate this stuff. That's his new purpose, right? And they are tied to helping whatever government factions are in place. And they're tied to Rey, and they assist when things get crazy. And Rey has Force users. Not your traditional Jedi Academy where she's training people, but she is in a way. But they're just using it for general good, not this strict light versus dark thing, right? It's like, that's just be good people and use these tools to help and research and get control of these things, these problems that are happening around the universe. And it's going to tie in because we have Poe's factions and solving missions and problems. And then we have these exploration missions, and they're going to overlap when they find this horrifying scene. Someone's been going around and like doing horrible things to collect these dark artifacts. So they come across a sequence where there are a lot of dead people, and I'll explain a little more later what I mean by that, because it ties in. So the mission is twofold, right? The protection and emergency assistance. You're dealing with leftovers of the First Order, Final Order, Empire, whatever. Episode 10, by the way, I'm going to call it Mysteries of the Sith. So let's get to the more details here. I explained the vibe. Rey has a sizable collection. There's lots of Easter eggs there. We talked about small missions or saving colonies. Okay, the reveal here is one of the artifacts you're going after is, and we could do a couple artifacts, but you could do something like Revan's lightsaber or something, right? So these cultists are going after stuff like that. But there's also darker weapons at a large scale. And the reveal, sort of the first or third act of the first movie, is that who loves collecting stuff? It's an aged Thrawn. And he's got collections everywhere. And he still has his own faction. He still has his own ship. He's got his own little the temples he's collected over the years when he was doing his own thing on the side of the Empire, right? And we see a lot of these scenes that Rey's coming across, or Rey's team is coming across. These horrifying scenes are caused by Thrawn's acolytes. And the third act is like this congruence voicing is coming together, and there's a masked figure who's a Force user, and Rey or some of her non-traditional Jedi have this lightsaber sequence with this figure, but this figure gets away. We don't know who it is, and that's sort of where it ends. It ends as a reveal of like this artifact ties into Sith lore, this new threat. Who's this like Maul-esque Jedi user or not Force user that got away, and what's their ties to Thrawn? This is where I changed the formula. In the second movie, I don't have a title for like episodes 11 and 12, but the 11 movie, episode 11, you guys tell me pick up a name. It's the cold open in the beginning is entirely told from a different perspective. It's the events of the first movie, again, from the perspective of that masked figure. And that masked figure we learn, and through their going hunting for the same stuff that Rey's team is hunting for, but we learn that this person doesn't work for Thrawn at all. They're also after these artifacts because they've seen what's done, and that figure is actually Kyle Katarn. Our introduction to another EU figure. If you haven't played Dark Forces and Mysteries of the Sith and all this stuff like that, and then his connections to Mara Jade, who's also not canon, and all that stuff, like in the Jedi Academy, a lot of cool connections there. We can retell in this post Saga era,
can we put Dash Rendar in your series?
I thought about Dash. You can do an aged. Yeah, why not? He could be an aged. But what would he be doing at this point in time? Would he be smuggling? Would he be still working for some version of the Rebel Alliance?
I don't care. He doesn't even have to be the same age. I mean, he could be whatever. Since he's in the EU,
Dash Rendar is the captain of this light carrier they have around Ossus. He deals with the supply line and setting up the missions for Rey, coordinating between Rey's team and Poe's assault teams.
You sold me now. I'm going to go see this.
Yeah. So, but this figure, like, it's cool. Right away, you see this figure, you're like, oh gosh, here's this dark user that we met him in the first movie. But when his first confrontation, you see him take out some of Thrawn's acolytes. You're like, oh wait, he's taking out Thrawn's elites. He's not following these rules. Who is this guy? And it reveals he's Kyle Katarn. He's been doing this thing the whole time. So this another lone wolf, non-Jedi, non-Sith type character out there doing what they think is right for their own purposes. They have their own personal connection to this. And of course, chapter 3 or episode 12 leads to that unholy alliance of sorts of like Kyle and Rey and her non-traditional Jedi users who are not afraid to push the boundaries and go into all these cool ancient Sith locations to root out these cultists and to root out what Thrawn's using them for, his own weird quest for power. But again, I wanted more ground was up front. Like, this is learning from before, right? This is not a galactic scale event, right? This is not, he's creating a super weapon to destroy the Senate and control planets. That's not what Thrawn's quest for power is all about. It's more singular, right? So I wanted to, so there's real stakes because of that, because a lot of this, it's ensemble. It's not just Rey, it's Rey's team. There's death there. Poe is going to die in the third movie, right? Or second movie.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. The characters, it's all trademark, copyright. The characters take this thing seriously, even though it's smaller scale, and they act accordingly. Like the same thing I said about Rogue One. The films will follow the rules of the lore. We're not going to get goofy with force powers, right? And there's no more galactic scale threats because that's goofy. We've seen that happen in a trilogy. We've seen it solved. We saw the precursor and set up to that, and then we saw it again in an even goofier way through episode 7 to 9. So we're past that. There's no round object with a big laser blowing up CGI planets. That's not happening. It's about character, right? So that's kind of the focus of that. And in the third act, we're finally going to see in live action Korriban or Moraband, whatever you want to call the ancient Sith planet, and that big set piece there where we finally take out Thrawn and his right hand in smaller scale battles in space on the planet. And the end of it is sort of a reset of what Jedi are. There's no more Jedi in dark and light. It's like, that's just use these locations and research it. Use this energy to learn, and then we can set up a location. On Korriban could be a planet that's functional the same way Ossus is. These central planets that are so intricately tied to the Force. They can be used and associated with the government in a non-negative, non-positive way, but just like this is part of the world now, and there are Force users. The Force Awakening caused an increase in Force users, and this is the result of that. There are many of them, and now they have a place to go. Think of Xavier's Academy for the Gifted. They have a place to go now, but it's not like lose your family. You can't have loved ones. Follow my rules. Don't cross this line, because you've crossed this line. You're evil. You got to fight. You have a red lightsaber now. It's red. It's bad. It's like, no, it's not about that anymore. It's a little more simple. There's good and bad, whether you're a Force user or not. So let's see the good, do some good. So that's kind of my pitch, and it brings in some EU stuff, and it continues what we had before. It gives Rey a purpose now. Rey doesn't have to be the central figure learning. She's like a researcher teaching. She's involved when she needs to be, but doesn't have to be the person doing every single lightsaber fight. She got a whole bunch of new characters doing that kind of stuff too, an ensemble. And you got a Rogue Squadron-esque group of people who are real pilots, not like Poe Dameron CGI crazy flight sequences, where they lose in battles, the same way we saw in Rogue One and Andor. So it's more grounded, to use that infamous word, and simple in that respect. So that's where I'll leave it.
I will tell you this. The common thread I see between the three of us is very much we really, really like the Andor Rogue One concept and approach to Star Wars. And I see a lot of that in what you're describing as your wish for a 3-episode trilogy where, yeah, it is this giant space weapon that's going to take out CGI planets. I want to put that on my quotes later on because it's such a great way of framing it, because they did that 3 times, 4. I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't even know.
Yeah, and so it's one of those things where, yeah, I wanted to approach my story as more approaching like, okay, what would an invasion look like, and all these people have to work together, like that's intriguing and compelling. And same kind of concept though, right? Like I wasn't imagining a big giant space weapon, like these bad guys, like it's same kind of concept. I wish I would have described it the same way, and I'm not trying to copy or anything, but like the idea of you have ground level stuff going on, you have, aerial stuff going on. It's a war. I mean, that's what war is. And again, Rogue One, I think that's why I love that movie so much, is that's exactly what that movie showed. It was like Black Hawk Down. It was, like any other war movie we've seen. And it was just painting all these different layers of that. And so before we get into buy or sell, who are your casting what ifs? I'll start with you, Rob, since you had the last.
I wrote down some names of actors I like. You're looking for just like general like wish list casting for the characters?
Like if you could cast anybody in your movie that you just pitched us, who would you put?
Sure. Let me give you a few names here. Okay. So I chose actors who are notorious for character work, but you don't see them as leading people all the time. And they are genuinely proven good people to work with behind the camera, in front of the camera. They are not the type of people you see in tabloid magazines. So I'll say this one because it's right off the bat, and we're all talking about The Last of Us lately, but I'll say Nick Offerman will be one of these characters in a leadership type role. Barry Pepper, a Canadian actor who I love from Saving Private Ryan. Jeffrey Wright, you know him from Commissioner Gordon now, but Westworld and everything. Yeah, everything. Another Canadian, Carrie Ann Moss. Well, actually, I can take that off. She's in The Acolyte, so I'll take that off. Andrew Koji. He was in Bullet Train most recently. He's in Warrior.
Yes.
Deserved a lot more screen time in Bullet Train because he's an incredible actor and a martial artist. He would be a fighter in this. Yeah. Dave Bautista in a behind-the-scenes like softer role, not a combatant, not a pilot, not a warrior, but like that Bautista do what he's actually really good at and act and give you some heart. I was looking at I like both. Have you guys seen The Black Phone by Scott Derrickson? The 2 leads in that, the kids are incredible. I want them as younger like Force users in training. This is your like your brother sister dynamic of the next generation, sort of, but not really, because it's not following that exact template of the previous trilogies, right? Yeah, I got a few other names here. You could put like I really want to get Keanu Reeves in some kind of wise type fighter role, just because I haven't seen him in Star Wars. The lightsaber just seems like that is the poster. So awesome. But I don't know what, and I feel like I want to use him as a villain, as like the right hand of Thrawn that we have to deal with, who actually takes out Poe.
Who do you cast to play
causes
Thrawn?
in? I'm blanking from like who voices him in Rebels. What's his name? Lars.
Mikkelsen, right?
Yeah.
It's Lars Mikkelsen. Yeah, him. I literally have him.
Right.
But also the Thrawn contingent is completely dependent on what they do with Thrawn in Ahsoka.
The Ahsoka series.
Exactly. And I'm hoping this is a character they don't just kill off in the modern era. Like he can live and age. He's too smart for that. So I feel like I would love to see him survive whatever that story is, and then this is where he comes back, and this is where Thrawn's story hits its peak and ends. Is in this trilogy.
It would be interesting, because there is rumored that Ezra, the character Ezra from Rebels, will emerge in live action in the Ahsoka series. It would be interesting to see if he sticks around after that, if he's still alive during the events of Rey's time, and what an older Ezra. I can't remember if he was one of the voices that was there at the end of episode 9, which we weren't going to talk about. Yeah, that would be. I like Ezra. I think he's an interesting character. But Thrawn is entirely dependent on that. I love it though. I think it's a great idea.
They cast Ezra, right? I was going to say they cast.
Oh,
Ezra.
Maybe they have.
Yeah, they have.
Spondy's playing him in Ahsoka. So yeah.
Great. There you go. Okay.
Oh, yeah. But yeah,
Rob
character could be
keeping
around
us honest on the news. Yeah. My casting what ifs, I didn't really have many because it's just again with an unknown concept, it's like hard to think through who these characters look like and stuff like that. I definitely want Alan Tudyk to voice a droid in some capacity. That's going to happen. For the main character, I referenced the name as Bo Jaren. I always imagine it as a female character. So I am in love with Phoebe Waller-Bridge right now. So I would put her in that space, in that character. It'd be interesting to see her take the lead of a Star Wars character. Dash Rendar, though, man, I could go a lot of different ways with Dash. I like Idris Elba. It's like kind of an older, grizzled kind of Dash Rendar character.
I have him on my list too. That's smart.
Yeah. But if you wanted to go white guy, I'm trying to think who would be a good smuggler, kind of older white guy.
Russell Crowe.
Nah. Maybe Chris Hemsworth. That would be kind of intriguing. I mean, if you want to go with Aussies, like get him out of Thor and just kind of have him as a fun kind of pilot, not like kind of to your similar like Dave Bautista. Like he's not a physical, like sort of combatant role. He's kind of more of a fun, because he does comedy real well. I mean, I think that's one of the things he does. So,
Tom Cruise.
I can't.
Here, I answer your question. I think Keanu Reeves could play an older Kyle Katarn, I suppose.
Ooh.
If he's the masked figure doing lightsaber stuff on his
Keanu
own.
could be my Dash Rendar.
Wait, no, he's Kyle Katarn.
All right, Vactor. You've got you're casting what ifs for the Knights of the Old Republic idea that you have.
Yeah, mine is just my favorite actors right now. Idris Elba would be in there. Jonathan Majors is my current favorite actor, so
nice.
Put him in there somewhere. Glenn Powell, I loved him in Top Gun Maverick. Zazie Beetz, been doing some great work on Atlanta. Also playing off of your Nick Offerman, Last of Us, Murray Bartlett. I loved what he did in that episode. And then I've been on this is another Star series. I've been on a Star Trek Discovery binge lately. So, and I'm going to mispronounce her name. Sonequa Martin Green. She plays Michael Burnham.
She's great.
She's a great actress. Great in that show.
Her. So come on over to Star Wars.
The guy who's the guy that plays? He's kind of like a Dash Rendar character. He's like a younger Idris Elba. That was in like the last season. He was kind of like.
He's awesome. I forget his name.
Yeah, I don't
remember. He's a British actor too.
You could put that guy as my Dash Rendar too. If you can't get Idris, sign him up. So
I like that.
Yeah.
I also
All
had two more. Well, these are I kind of mentioned them all. Judy Greer I like as well.
Oh, yeah.
And Michelle Yeoh I had
She's
too.
great.
Michelle Yeoh, by the way, also in Discovery,
Yes.
right? Season 1.
Yes.
I'm waiting for that spinoff.
Mm.
That would be everyone, I think. So the only one I'm going to take off is Carrie Ann Moss because she's already cast. So
Paul Rudd. I want Paul Rudd as a. If you can't get Chittick, get Paul Rudd.
I was
going to
say that.
I think that would be cool.
Yeah.
that's a good one.
Let's get Ki Hua Kwan, short round.
Yep.
Let's get him in there.
Oh my God! Good
Absolutely.
call.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Buy or sell. I'm the host, so I get to buy. So I gotta buy yours, Rob. I mean, I don't want to sound biased to mine, but I like mine too. I actually want to see yours first and then see mine, given that mine still stretches out afterwards, and I think they can actually kind of live in the same kind of stretch. So maybe mine aren't 10, 11, 12. Mine are 13, 14, 15, if you really want to keep going.
I would also buy Rob Keyes.
Oh man, you guys just being nice. I'm just guessing. Can I give my answer? So I'm so selfish, and I'm just going to choose what I want to see for my movies. So I'm going to choose my own. But that being said, I actually want to see Vactors as a series, and not just like 6 or 8 episodes. I think should be bigger than that. I'm talking like 12, but not like 20 minutes, like bigger, like actually like this Game of Thrones. And then Kevin, for you, I want to see yours as like an anthology series, as films. I think the bigger scale, shorter. I hate to be an advocate for shorter screen time, but the idea of the invasion stuff, it's like I think that'd be cool as a cinematic big event piece in shorter format. Whereas I think what Vactor is saying to me is like I want to see that as a longer form character thing. So I kind of want to see. We're all hitting the same geek notes, so I kind of want to see it all selfishly.
Yeah. So I would be remiss if I didn't bring up Adam, my partner in crime on Fuse Film, and Vactor. I talked to him shortly before this, and I said, Adam, if I know you're not going to be on the podcast, but what would you do? And you want to know what he said? He said, if it was me, I would have made Ray pregnant at the end of episode 9. Like when she turns to the side and the girl asks her, who are you? And she's pregnant. And then I would have had a whole series about the twin. She's got twins, and it's the solos, and you just stick with the whole family drama thing, and blah 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 blah. And I'm just like, so you, Adam. So,
well, yeah, it's tough because it's nice that the saga continues, but it's like we're beyond the Skywalker saga. The connection, I think, is for me, it's like Rey's in there at the backbone of all of this, and she's still there at the end, and she's helping, even though she's not the central figure, learning and doing all this stuff, and she's responsible for resetting the status quo, resetting the force use, orchestrating the collection of, what I mean? So that's my solution. I feel
your idea and my idea had a lot of similarities, maybe different execution in the idea of, we got to move away from.
Well, that's
family.
what Rian Johnson was trying to do at the end of 8. Yeah. Let's bring back Broom Boy. Come on, Broom Boy.
Oh man, that planet though, the casino planet where they rescue the animals and not the kids. The animals are just going to bring the animals back and make the kids get punished for that. No, that's a good idea. Good idea.
Yeah, that I had so much frustration on that.
Same here. That whole second act, man.
Lots of little things
that
were good. Lots of bad things that were bad. All right, so. This is a new thing we're bringing into the pitch, and I did some research on this at one point. Die Hard was actually, at one point, the most pitched movie in Hollywood in terms of a Die Hard concept. So if you think about when that movie came out in 1988, how many Die Hard ripoffs came out afterwards? So all right, let's do Die Hard on a train, Under Siege 2. Let's do Die Hard on a boat, Under Siege. Let's do Die Hard in a hockey rink with the Jean-Claude Van Damme. Let's do Die Hard on a bus, Keanu Reeves, right? There's so many Die Hard ripoffs out there. And I'm telling you this is fact. It is one of the most pitched concepts for a movie in history. So I thought it would be fun to have just a little fun category here. Now you have to take your pitch or a pitch really quick off the cuff, and you have to Die Hard style Star Wars. Now, I feel like they did this a little bit with that movie with Guy Pearce, The Lookout. I feel like that's Die Hard in space, right? You have the prison, and it's a breakout kind of thing, and he's kind of got the quippy action hero lines and stuff like that. But I'll start just to make it easy. I've always liked the idea of you said it during, the original trilogy time, and it's just like, I don't know. It's like an Imperial stronghold somewhere. It's the man versus the odds. It's the exact Die Hard story. You just have him there. He's going against stormtroopers and Imperial officers, and he's got to rescue a group of whatever, and it's just have a fun action movie just set within Star Wars. That's how I would do it. There's probably a lot of other interesting, fun ways you could approach Die Hard and Star Wars, but Die Hard and Star Wars, guys, give me something.
Oh boy! I mean, I can give you a loose pitch just because I like the visuals of it. I'm going to take your Dash Rendar here.
Ooh,
he escapes Hoth on the Outrider, goes on his mission. I guess it's the first act. It all leads to him confronting Prince Xizor, the villain of that whatever the game, on that space station where that big final space battle is, and he's stuck on that station. Has to get out and get to his ship. And so the Die Hard element is like the second and third act, all aboard the space station and trying to get out and get to his ship and also stop the master plan of the evil villain sort of thing. So
I love it. Justin, I see you intensely thinking.
Well, while he's thinking, I'll give you some
those
more
who are
details.
listening. He's thinking.
Oh, you said I thought you were going, Rob.
I was just joking, but I will if you want. It's like
Actually, I enlisted the help of ChatGPT for this one. Die Hard in Space, a high-stakes, action-packed adventure combining the intensity of Die Hard with the epic space world of Star Wars. Join John McClane, a tough-as-nails cop, as he takes on a dangerous group of rogue Imperials who've taken over the space station. With limited resources and the fate of the galaxy on the line, McClane must use his wit, cunning, and raw determination to take down the enemy and save the day. Get ready for the intense shootouts, daring escapes, and a dose of humor in this pulse-pounding sci-fi thrill ride. Die Hard meets Star Wars.
I bought it. It's in.
Yeah. I mean, and is Jai Courtney plays the version of John McClane? No boot, barefoot.
I can see that.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow. Thanks, you, chat. GPT. Just calls him John McClane.
There's definitely gonna be movies that are written by ChatGPT coming out. Just mark my words.
Oh, there already is. I've been reading about people who've written kids' books. You can use ChatGPT to do the writing. They use AI like for the images and stuff like that. I mean,
that's crazy, man.
I've been using it to like help write my screenplay.
It's going to take over the world.
That I've been working on, and we use it a lot at work and marketing. It's like the possibilities of it are endless. And like when you think about the time efficiency, it's amazing.
ChatGPT, aka Skynet.
Very real. Very real. All right. Well, I'm going to give some final thoughts here. First and foremost, though, Rob, thank you. We are so honored to have you. We're so blessed to hear your voice on the show and get a lot of really great insights. And you won the pitch. So we'll put a poll out if you could help us get it out there, and we'll see if our fans of Screen Rant and everybody else buy Rob's pitch or not. And we'll see. We'll come back with the results at some point down the road. But final thoughts are, Star Wars is everything to so many people. And even with the disappointment of the sequel trilogy, it was just nice to have Star Wars again. And I still hold to that. It's something that I can't wait to sit down and explore more with my kids. My boys, and Christian he's already diving into some of it, with some of the animated stuff. We were watching Tales of the Jedi the other day. He didn't like some of it because he's like, it's too scary. So I guess maybe 3 is a little young with some of this stuff, but he does like lightsabers and he wants one next Christmas. So we'll see what happens there. Nice. But yeah, Star Wars is it's got something that everybody can love, and it's got action, it's got drama, it's got space, it's got aliens, it's whatever your identity is out there, it's going to have something that you want. And as long as they keep trying to tell a great story, the universe is already there. George built it. You don't have to do any more. And to me, that's the thing that some of these creators that have touched it already maybe forgot a little bit, because it was like maybe this overwhelming thing. And I get it. Like, I don't know if I could have done with JJ. I don't think fans of Star Wars should take on Star Wars. Like, I think you brought up Star Trek the other day, or not the other day, but earlier in the episode. The reason why JJ made a great Star Trek movie is he was very open. He was not a Star Trek guy. So he was able to be objectionable about everything and say, okay, what's the best thing, the best story to tell? They give him Star Wars, and it's like all he wanted to do is make a New Hope fan film. I mean, that's what it was. And so find people out there that are great storytellers, great directors, and, you know, make something that people will want to talk about and see and stuff like that. And we've proven that with stuff like The Last of Us. Like, I know it's a popular show right now, and I played a little bit of the game. And I don't know if those guys who created the show were like super uber fans of it. Maybe they are, but like,
yeah, Craig Mazin
is he? Okay.
Well, the showrunner is the guy who made the game. Neil Druckmann.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. He even directed the second episode, one of the episodes. Yeah.
Well, it shows you what I know. But my point being is like, you know, that's a little different than, maybe that's a bad example, because that's like basically having Lucas, like, you know, it's his baby and he can do whatever he wants. But like, I don't know. I just think there's things are better when you're not the fan of something. You can approach it objectionably, and it's hard to do because we're all fans of something. Like, you wouldn't want to do something if you weren't interested, right? So, but there's so many great things out there too. And I'll say this one final thing. For me, the reason why the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been so successful, even the crap movies that they've done, has been these filmmakers have taken things like, for example, I'm going to use Spider-Man. We want to do a John Hughes movie with Spider-Man. That's what that was, right? We want to do a buddy cop film or series. That's what Falcon and the Winter Soldier was, right? Like, they're taking things that people love from different genres and saying, hey, let's make that into a superhero thing. There's no reason why you can't take the same kind of approach to Star Wars. And Justin, I'm going to ask you to quote this because I don't have it with me, and maybe you can summarize it. But the way Grant Morrison described Superman and why American writers say that they don't want to do Superman because he's so hard, because he's too much of a god. But he was like, you know, what did he say? He said something along the lines of.
So actually, I was going to say this for my final thought, but yeah, the same idea with Star Wars, I think, is what Grant Morrison said about Superman and a lot of superheroes. The idea that they existed before us and they're going to exist after us. They are more real than we are because they're going to continue on in the hearts and minds and the imaginations. People is their belief basically keeps those ideas alive. And Star Wars is going to be like that. It's never going to die because it's just going to keep on. People are just going to keep fanning the flames over the years. I think that is a very relevant statement.
Yep. Rob, what's your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are, I wish I articulated my pitch a little more clearly. I feel like I need to write it down in bullet points. No, I didn't play up my props here. This is the artifact in my pitch. This is Revan's lightsaber.
Nice.
And what's cool about it is that it has two colors. It goes red and purple because can be dark or light, right? I also have Leia's lightsaber, one of my favorites here. Look, Star Wars is a framework for unlimited storytelling potential. And the reason we can sit here today and nitpick and tear stuff down and talk about the what ifs and share our own ideas for that and what could be the future is because of pure passion. We love this stuff. And when there's something disappointing, something that could or should be better, it's not just a movie failing us. We feel it and we remember it forever. We started this podcast by talking about stuff that defined our childhood, which led us all the way to today, recording this episode. There's not many things in this world that has that kind of impact on people. Mm-hmm. So that is the epitome of what Star Wars represents and what it always will represent. So, sure, I am disappointed in so many things, but there are so many things that blow my mind in the past, even right now, and that which I think that makes us, to speak to the title of the original film, it gives us hope for the future, right? So it's awesome, and I'm glad you guys are doing this. I'm so happy you invited me to bring on this one, and I hope we can talk more Star Wars in the future.
Yeah.
Let's do it. All right. So, Rob, tell our fans where everybody can find you in social media and read your stuff and all that.
Yeah. I run a little site called screenrant.com, so head over there to see the work of all my team. We have lots of social channels, and I've launched a couple of new video initiatives over there.
Best.
Lots of interviews. We do hundreds of interviews a month, and now you can see it on all platforms. I try to fit in writing as well. I namely do exclusives here and there, but I hope to do a lot more and try to get out traveling again soon. Well, now that my kids are getting a little older and things are opening up. But on Twitter, I'm at Rob_Keys. That's Keyes. And you can find me on Twitch. I occasionally stream, and I'm getting back into it. It's at FailCube on Twitch and Instagram.
Awesome. Vactor.
Yeah, my most of my social media stuff is just my last name, Vactor, Vactor. But my podcast and YouTube channel is called the Vactorverse. So if you want to check out all of the things that I'm doing over there, mainly right now, I'm interviewing a lot of different people online who have stories about comic books, just kind of their own comic book origin stories, how they got into comics, different things like that. But also, I have a podcast with my dad on the Vactorverse where he is telling stories from his life for my son, which I hadn't even mentioned in this whole entire episode. My son's name is Ezra, and he is specifically named after Ezra Bridger from Rebels.
Wow.
But
I love that.
Yeah, so the whole point of the podcast is so when Ezra gets older, he will have this video form of my father in his current state, so that he will have that to be able to pass down to him. But that's all at the Vactorverse on YouTube.
That's awesome.
Fantastic. Very special. Thank you, fellas, for joining us on the Pitch Podcast. Super excited to continue down the journey of pitching ideas for our favorite franchise. We'd love to hear from everybody. You can follow us on Fuse Film at Fuse Film on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And that's where we engage. We talk about all the stuff that we talked about on these podcasts there with you guys. I want to hear your ideas for future pitch episodes. It doesn't always have to be this fanboy stuff. There's a lot of great things out there that we can touch on. But huge shout out to Rob. Thank you again for joining us. And everybody have an awesome time in your life. Peace.